Today we are going to look at the concept of honesty and integrity with the self and with the organization we are connected with, the community, the wider world, because there's definitely two different ways that we relate, one with ourselves and one with the wider community. I did spend many years preparing the course material about education in values and spirituality. And in the time where I was doing that, which took probably 7 years to prepare properly, along with many researchers and experiments and tryouts and surveys and so many things. But one thing that became very clear is that people in general do not make a difference between values and virtues. They think usually it's all one and the same thing. Virtues, values, qualities, powers, all the same. But when you investigate, I have the sanskara of looking deeply into ideas and how these ideas are practiced in day-to-day life, and why there are differences and where there are differences. And we hear about this a great deal in the Murlis, especially the Avyakta Murlis that Baba has been giving us. At the moment, the whole world is in a state of uncertainty. So that applies to the self, to one's family, to one's community, one's organization, the political spectrum, the social spectrum. Everywhere there is uncertainty and insecurity, and this takes the form of pressure. And when a person is under pressure, then their values and their virtues are also under pressure. So today I would like to look at how we are handling ourselves in terms of honesty and integrity with ourselves and our social environment, our organization, and the other people that we live and work with. First of all, I would like to clarify that honesty and integrity are values, but they're not virtues. Some of you may be quite surprised to hear me say this, and so I would like to clarify what's the difference between a value and a virtue. And in our teachings of Raj Yoga, in the Murlis, we never hear about values, but we hear a lot about virtues. Whereas when we are teaching and talking, we talk a lot about values. And so this is an interesting difference. And I thought about this quite a lot, and I examined it closely to see what is it really that God wants for us, that God is teaching us. He says to us in our teachings that you must become a divine person, also called a deity, and there are descriptions of deities which are quite clear in India, and so you can calculate and check yourself against these characteristics. Are you completely viceless, completely virtuous? Are you, it is called Maryada Purushottam, Do you understand the boundaries, and do you act as an elevated person in the context of the concept of boundaries and appropriate limits in terms of behavior? Are you Sola Kala Sampuran, 16 celestial degrees? This refers to light, because when you are meditating, you are focusing your soul on the being of God, and you are drawing power and light into your soul through that spiritual connection. This is what we mean by yoga, the link between the soul and the Supreme Soul. Just like when you're charging your mobile now, I think there are mobiles that you can charge remotely without plugging them into the electricity, because we have other methods like Bluetooth and 5G and all this. So we are now used to communication without wires, and our communication with God has to be without wires. But I think many people couldn't quite understand how that would be. But technology, communications technology, has helped us to understand this quite well. Just using thought, we can make a connection, and we can draw power into ourselves to the point of maximum. That is called 16 celestial degrees. In that, the word values doesn't come. And the reason it doesn't come is because values vary according to culture, religion, class and caste, educational background, according to whether you are in a male form or in a female form. Values also change in terms of your age. Very young people's values are different from the older people's values, and it changes determined by whether you are well or unhealthy, whether you are successful or not successful. All of these different conditions that we find ourselves in, which are social conditions, will make a difference in our values. But virtues are different. Virtues are not based on your social, religious, political, nationality, language. None of these things has anything to do with virtues, but they have everything to do with values. So virtues are the essential, original qualities of the soul, which we say in our studies that the essential qualities are purity, peace, power, love, bliss. Some people add a few more, but those are my understanding of the quintessential qualities of the soul. And then our relationship with the Supreme Being, our relationship with the Divine, is one in which we are able to absorb, and we are gifted with many different virtues. And different people have different virtues. And sometimes we say 36 divine virtues, and we have a list of those. But as I said before, we don't really make any distinction between values and virtues. And if a word pleases us and seems very positive, then we will say, well, it must be a virtue. But I make this distinction because there is never any clash between virtues. However, there is very often a clash of values. And when you determine that a value is a virtue, you may find it confusing when there is a clash between that value that you call a virtue and another value that you call another virtue, because virtues cannot clash with each other, but values do clash with each other. And I want to go into a bit more detail of that, because we all are different. Even if we say all of us are practicing Raj Yoga, but nevertheless our circumstances are different, our nationalities are different, our religious and cultural backgrounds are different, the way that we grew up is different, our education is different, and therefore we have a big spectrum of values, and it is quite possible for us to come into what sometimes people call a misunderstanding, but which is very often a clash of values. And knowing that there is no such thing as universal values, we shouldn't really try to identify something as a universal value, because there cannot be universal value, because values vary from place to place, person to person, situation to situation. But virtues are universal. We're talking today about honesty, and many people say honesty is a virtue. But it cannot be a virtue because the description and definition of it vary very much, and specifically it varies according to culture. And for example, honesty in United States, and I lived many years in United States, so I'm in a good position to know what American people think is the meaning of honesty. And it is connected with integrity. Honesty in the United States means that you tell the truth. If you don't tell the truth, that's not honest. It means that you do not steal. If you steal, it is not honest. If you deceive someone, that is not honest. Now, in India, if you tell the truth and it disturbs someone, you may think that that's not good. So you may adjust your words such that the person is not offended, or you may avoid the subject altogether because someone may be offended. And so there's a difference because of a kind of what we call as a tacit agreement between everyone as to what honesty is among us. But as soon as you go out of us into a different culture, a different community, people interact with these values differently. And so when you have people from different cultures coming together or living together, you get plenty of opportunity for this kind of misunderstanding, and it sometimes creates a lot of unhappiness because you think someone thinks the same way as you, and you carry on like that for a while until all of a sudden there's a big problem. And when you go into the detail of that problem, you find that you define your values differently. And I could give all kinds of different examples from different cultures, different age groups, and so on. But I think you probably get my meaning. And so here we are. I think that the vast majority of people who are with me here today are from India, are very much part of the Brahma Kumaris study and practice and movement and way of life. And so therefore, within our gathering, there is an understanding of what we mean by honesty. But it's very interesting to me that our spiritual understanding is colored by our cultural background. And when we are all of the same culture coming into spiritual practice and we all bring the cultural values into it, we do not notice that we did that. It's only when you start living and working and studying with people of a very different cultural background or several different cultural backgrounds that you realize that there are these differences. And then the idea that comes up in the community is, well, we need to find out what would be the right value that corresponds to the virtues, the universal virtues, so that we are having the same understanding. What do we mean by honesty? What do we mean by integrity? And we have to filter the cultural bias on the understanding of that word. And I remember one time in the 1980s, I was living in a center in San Francisco in USA, and there were several of us, all different backgrounds. One was a Gujarati sister from Gujarat. One was a brother who was black from California and whose ancestry was mixed, black and Indian, like the new Vice President of America, Kamala Harris. She is mixed black and Indian. And then we had another one who was a mixture of Jewish and Native American Indian. And then we had another one who was completely Jewish, from a very high caste of Judaism, Cohen. And then we had another one who was Swedish but raised in Africa as a missionary with his family. And so very, very different group of people. And each one was completely different from the next one. And we were living together as a spiritual family in the center. And because we were so very different, it became very clear that we needed to talk about what we actually mean by these different values. And what we also found is that the wording of the spiritual teachings, which we call the Murlis, they of course are given in Hindi, but it's not totally Hindi. The Murlis have quite a bit of English in them, and that English is the English of the 1930s and 40s, which is completely different from the English now, because language always changes over time. And so there are many misunderstandings about that. Then there are many Sindhi words, because Baba's original language was Sindhi, and some people, they don't know whether it's Sindhi or Hindi, so sometimes there's a misunderstanding there. And there are many words which are Farsi, and so some people know, some people don't. There are many Urdu words. There are Sanskrit words, which different people define differently. I think there was once or twice a French word, and so it's a big mixture. And then these are translated into English, and then from there they're translated into other languages. But take, for example, the word Sadgati. It's a very common word, sadgati. And what do we mean by sadgati? Well, one thing that happens in translation, which is also a matter of values and honesty and integrity, is if you don't know exactly what that word means, you will guess. And you may guess right or you may guess wrong. And when people do translations, they very often will say to themselves, well, if it sounds like something, then it probably is. So I was actually trained as a professional translator at university. So I learned about all these things when I was quite young. And for example, they call these words which sound similar to each other, but which actually have very different meaning. They call them false friends. And unless you know that there are many words like that that are false friends. So I gave the example of Sadgati, because Sadgati and Durgati, what is that? And so if you go into the conventional Hindu guru's explanation of these things, you will get a variety of explanations, and then you can pick the one that seems right to you. But someone has to put it into English, and so it generally gets translated as salvation. And so salvation seems quite like Sadgati, but you have to check what is the definition of Sadgati and what is the definition of salvation. And if you don't check, then we can say that's not honest. Because the people that will receive your translation will assume that you know what you're talking about. They will assume that you checked. But if you didn't check, if you were a little careless, or you just said, well, somebody else said it was this, so therefore it must be, but you didn't check, then that's not exactly the level of honesty and integrity that some may expect, you see. But you yourself will say, no, it's okay. Someone else will say, no, it's not okay, you see. So you see these variations. It depends very much on the value structure of different people. And not everybody is so particular about all this. But some people are very particular. And then if you get very particular, then you get very offended, easily offended. And although to be easily offended doesn't really come under the category of integrity and honesty, but yet if you're easily offended, that is also a vice, because it is more, you can say it's a better level of integrity if you control yourself from being easily offended, because you need to understand that maybe you got offended, but somebody didn't intend to offend you. And maybe their values and your values are different, and it doesn't really make sense to get offended when no harm was intended. But if you do get offended, then from a spiritual angle, I think you would be graded, you would get a mark in your results, because this is a study. It would be a minus point, because there was a lack of flexibility. And flexibility is another value, because flexibility in one group is different from flexibility in another group. But in all of these things, we're looking for something that I call harmony. I think harmony is a very useful word for us because we are so different. And one of the instructions that God has given us is come into harmony with each other, harmonize sanskaras. And again, sanskaras is another word which is interpreted in many different ways. The word perfect is another word that is different for different people. There's a big difference between perfect meaning balanced and harmonious, and perfect meaning extreme. And whenever you have extreme people and they interact with other extreme people, they'll be extreme in different ways, and there will be a big clash because of lack of flexibility, because of lack of seeking balance, a lack of seeking harmony. There's one very interesting word or phrase which comes in our teachings every so often. And I think that this is going to help us understand how to be and how to proceed in this circumstance of insecurity and instability and uncertainty that we are in. And it is said, if you tell the truth in a harsh way or in an angry way, then it becomes falsehood. So somebody who is very fixed on honesty will say, well, you have to tell the truth whether it hurts or not. Someone else will say, yes, but if you tell the truth and it causes damage, then that's not good. And as far as I know, the person who first brought up this concept was Aristotle, the Greek philosopher. And whenever someone somewhere in any culture or religion says something that people say, yes, this is right, it tends to spread. And then sometimes you forget the origin of it and you start thinking, oh yeah, this is a Christian thing, or this is a Jewish thing, or this is a Buddhist thing, or this is a Hindu thing. But actually it came before. It came from somewhere, because we do tend to integrate things that we like into our culture, into what we call as ours, you see. Because why? A person always has a natural inclination to be the best, to be good, to be getting better, and to become the best. And so whatever we like, we say, yeah, we like it, so it must be good, it must take us to better and ultimately to best. But someone else may interpret it differently, and this is why we get all these clashes. If you think for a moment about these quintessential virtues that I mentioned, or qualities, the original dharma of the soul. And dharma is another of these words which gets translated in different ways. So generally speaking, we hear this word Hindu dharma, so we think that dharma means religion. But if you go deep into the word dharma and you look in all the dictionaries, and there's plenty now, in the old days there was only one which wasn't very good, but dharma means so many things. And religion is part of it, but not the whole thing. And if you look at the philosophical definition of dharma, it's what you are. So I like that one, because I'm a bit philosophically inclined. So dharma, okay, what is the original dharma of the soul? Pure, peaceful, powerful, loveful, blissful. This is our original state, our original condition. And why we are doing spiritual practice, why we are making all these efforts and meditating and studying and everything, why? So that we can be, in a practical way, people who exhibit these original qualities of purity, peace, power, love, bliss. But then how do we define them? What is love for me? What is love for you? There may be a difference, because the value system always creates a bias in the interpretation of these words. But if I add the idea of purity, peace, power, love, bliss to when I'm thinking about honesty and integrity, then my interpretation of these words has to include these attitudes, qualities, approach in my relationship with myself, in my relationship with my family, my community, my organization. Now comes another aspect that we need to think about, and that is, what do I do when I become aware that someone is not honest, someone is behaving in a way that is not of integrity? What do I do? What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to handle this? So there are a number of teachings that we have received about that in Brahma Kumaris, which I think is quite helpful and useful. And one of them is, do not take the law into your own hands. And many times, suppose you are in a junior position and you see someone in a senior position doing something that offends you, then you get an emotional reaction and you think that something should be done about it because it's not right, things like that. So first of all, we have this expression, do not take the law into your own hands. Why not? Because it will not go well if you do that. Definitely not. There are procedures. You have to look at and find out what those procedures are, and you can follow those, and it may or may not reach the conclusion that you hope for. What we also learn is that what we are in here in this world is a drama. A drama in the sense it's like a three-dimensional film. In India, there's always been this idea of the lila, the game of God. And different people interpret it in different ways. But for us, we say that whatever is going on, whatever is happening, it is being done by souls, and that is their karma. So if they do a punya karma, then there will be very good results for themselves, for everyone else. It'll be positive, it'll be harmonious. Punya karma, very good. But sometimes people come under the influence of negativity and they do pap karma, they do negative karma. And when somebody does negative karma, there is a very interesting phrase that is often mentioned, and that is, Tumhara kya jata hai? Tumhara kya jata hai? Now, this is not usually translated accurately into English, but I investigated it and I discussed it with Dadi Janki, who is also my personal teacher and very, very keen on understanding the different words and phrases in the Murli very accurately. So what do you personally lose when someone else behaves in a way that you say offends you? And most of the time it offends you because you see it, you don't agree with it, but it doesn't actually cause you loss. So if there is something which doesn't actually cause you loss, then it's really not useful for you to do anything about it, and it's also not your job. And so in that case, you need to be a detached observer. That would be more of honesty and more of integrity. But you can see by what I'm saying that all of these are quite delicate matters to think about, to figure out how do you do, under which circumstances, and they do have to be thought about and discussed. Another thing is if you see something which is harming someone and you feel responsible to draw this to the attention of the people who are in authority, then you need to do that. If you are afraid and you don't say anything because you are afraid that something will happen to you, and then you allow something negative to happen without saying it, then that would also be a negative karma. That would be a lack of honesty, a lack of integrity, and this would be because you are afraid of getting drawn in. And this happens, it's something that you can see differently in different cultures. For example, in United States, if you see a car accident, then you stop, you take photographs, you find out if the person is okay, you call the police, all these things. This is totally normal. But in India, it's different because people have the feeling that if you stop and get involved, then you will get involved, and something will happen to you, and it will take your time and energy, and maybe something will go wrong. So a lot of people, because of they're afraid of what are the consequences of getting involved, they will rather just leave it and go away. And this also happens in matters of sexual harassment. Recently there's been so many cases of this, and it's all over the news, the different things that are happening, gang rapes and so on. And this also happens that if a girl is being set upon by some group of men who may be drunk or something, people will not go to her aid because they're afraid something might happen to them, or they will get involved, and then she has no protection. But among the people who are getting more and more concerned about giving support to women who are getting approached inappropriately by men if they're waiting at a bus stop or a train station or something like this, nowadays they're beginning to create a culture of just going and talking to the person so that those men feel that it is not a girl by herself. And then in that way it's people are becoming a little bit more caring. And I would say that that is more honest and more in a form of integrity, because the other way is, in a sense, selfish, it's fear-based, it's cowardly, it's lack of care for another human being. And again, there are different values. Some value systems say you have to be really caring about everybody, and some say you have to look after yourself and don't worry about anybody else. And there's a big spectrum in between. So ultimately, these matters, you have to make your own personal ethical policy. And so you see your relationship with yourself, how you grew up, what was going on in your family. In every family, there are good things and there are bad things. And your sanskaras are created like that. And many people, they will grow up in families where, for example, bribery and corruption is normal, so they think it's normal, so they carry on, and maybe sometimes they will get a court doing this, and they will be told this is wrong, and they will say, it's wrong? Are you sure it's wrong? I never heard this was wrong. I heard this was normal, you know. And so in that way, a person is able to get a message from their family that doesn't correspond with the legal system. And one of the problems that happens is that there is some discrepancy in every society between what is legal and what is moral. And one of the things that happens in that is, especially now that there are so many things, so many new inventions and so on. So there may be something that is not moral, but it's legal. So if it's legal, people will do it because their value system is, if it's legal, it's okay. If it's not moral, but it is legal, then we can get away with it, because with legal, there are consequences. If you're acting in an immoral way that is nevertheless legal, then it's okay. Like, for example, consumption of drugs and alcohol, tobacco, and all of this. You know, some drugs are legal, but extraordinarily harmful, like fentanyl, for example. Is an opioid. This is what is given to people who are addicted to heroin. So the medical people will give them fentanyl to get off, but fentanyl is much, much more addictive than heroin, but it's legal. And in some places now it's becoming illegal, more difficult to get, but doctors can get it very easily. And so you get many doctors who will begin to get addicted to legal drugs which are restricted, but they're not restricted for doctors. And alcohol is not legal in Gujarat, but there's all kinds of places where you can get it. And it's legal in some countries. Gandhi tried to create dry India, as it's called, but it was a problem for taxation, and people wanted alcohol. It's legal, therefore I can have it. But if you start to behave in a violent way because of the effect of alcohol, and you do a crime because of the alcohol, but because it's legal, there are no consequences. So you get a lot of domestic violence as a direct consequence of abuse of alcohol in the men. So these are all the things that we have to live with. And this is why I think it's really good for a person who is giving time and energy to their personal development, their spiritual development, to say, okay, this is me, and this is my personal ethical policy, and this is how I will live. And then you have to check yourself, because every so often you will get a situation where there is a clash between the voice of conscience, your personal ethical policy, and the circumstance that you find yourself in. And that is that if you do according to your conscience and according to your personal ethical policy, you will lose your job. Then you won't have money. Then you won't be able to live. Or you will be threatened with something from somewhere. And it's just one you against something much bigger than you. And you have to see how you're going to deal with that. In some cases, it may be wise to compromise. In some cases, it may be really bad to compromise. And so you have to develop what is called moral reasoning. Not very many people know how to do moral reasoning, but you have to really take a look at all the different circumstances or aspects of the circumstance that you're evaluating, and decide what would be the best course of action in this particular situation. Every situation is different, and so each situation must be evaluated on its own, according to its own details, and then you make a choice of action which is the best that you can do. Maybe there's some information you don't know, and if you knew it, you would act differently, but you don't know. So you try to act in a way that comes as close as possible to your sense of being honorable, honest, loving, in your power, not afraid, not on the basis of cowardice, and do your best to be the best person that you can from moment to moment when you have to make choice after choice during the day. And for us who study Raj Yoga, we find that the meditation that we do gives us the strength as well as the clarity to do the right thing, and then we feel better for that. But we cannot expect everyone to have the same level of honesty and integrity as oneself. And so therefore we do have to have some flexibility. And there are times when we are obliged to compromise, because if we don't, it would be really stupid, and that's not wise. So not so easy, but these are a few thoughts to think about in regard to honesty and integrity. So I will stop there. Om Shanti. So first of all, turn the attention within. Take your time to become conscious of the self as a soul. A tiny point of light, pure consciousness. Quiet and at peace. Detached from the past, not worried about the future. Just be in the present moment. Still and stable. Feel the original Dharma, peace, purity, personal power. The state of bliss and love. Gently let go of your physical form. Rise above your body. Let it sit there in that chair. And be free. Let the material world fall away. And enter the world of light. The home of souls. And there, the beautiful one, the light, waits for you. Feel the energy of light and power reaching you. And go close to that light. The mother, the father, the friend, the guide, the teacher. Be close to that ocean of love. And stay steady. Hold yourself in that light. And let that beautiful light and love spread far into the universe.